So my buddy Jon Justice does the morning show on Twin Cities News Talk, our iHeartRadio sister station in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Minnesota. And he and I were going back and forth on Twitter, on X. You can find him there at Jon Justice. And I suggested he come on so we could learn about the real Tim Walz, because obviously he's been portrayed as this command sergeant major, high school football coach, yada, yada, and at the DNC. But there's more to the story of Tim Walz. Jon Justice is joining me now on the Scott Sand Show. John, before we get into Tim Walz, the guy you're quite familiar with in Minnesota, breaking news today, Robert Kennedy, RFK Jr., stepping down, suspending his presidential race, and endorsing Donald Trump. Does that make a difference in Minnesota? Does that make a difference in the electoral math at all?
I think it does. Speaking to Governor Tim Walz, I expect this will make a big difference with what you hear from him out on the campaign trail. I think we'll all wait to see how this affects the polling. Everything I've heard so far, it's going to be very beneficial to Trump in those states that he needs to grab, especially, Pennsylvania and Georgia. But desperation, I was already sensing would set in as we got past the DNC. Walz can go on the attack. That's one of the reasons of a few that I think Kamala Harris picked him, because he can get very aggressive and play that progressive aggressive. And because of this endorsement of RFK Jr. For Trump, I expect you're going to see a very aggressive, angry Walz out at those rallies in the very near future.
See, I don't know a lot about Tim Walz, other than obviously what I've read over the last 2 weeks, but he does come across as very likable, very personable, especially, frankly, in comparison to J.D. Vance, who I'm friends with and have known for a long time here in Ohio. J.D. Vance comes across sometimes as a little aloof. Tim Walz does have that appearance as someone not familiar with him, as that goofy dad. So to think of him as an attack dog for Kamala Harris seems out of character for me, but you're more familiar with him than I am.
Well, it depends on the venue that Walz is talking to. He's very savvy. And when Kamala initially picked him, my assumption out of the gate was that he would be more of the, as I said, sort of aggressive, progressive to their attempts to sort of cast Kamala as more of the moderate. Now, I haven't seen that yet, so that sort of theory was a little bit off. But when you see Walz speaking to a more friendly crowd relating to, him being a Democrat, you see the more aggressive side come out of him. He was talking on the White Dudes for Harris Zoom call, and that's when you get the ridiculous, one person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. When he gets out in public and he knows that these are going to be clips that will be shown on the major news networks, he plays more of that folksy dad. But listen, make no mistake, he is a radical wrapped in moderate clothing. What we found out about him just over the course of the past few weeks, things that I wasn't even aware of, having been 2 years shy of a decade here in Minnesota, the guy is as far left as anybody. I mean, I put him left on the side of like the squad. He's that much of a radical. You simply cannot buy this moderate persona that he's putting out in public.
We're talking to Jon Justice. Find him on Twitter at Jon Justice from Twin Cities News Talk on our iHeartRadio app. So, yeah, it's interesting because I think the Democrats were smart in limiting his speaking time Wednesday night. He spoke for only like 16, 17 minutes, used a lot of, sports analogies and referenced his family, which does make him more relatable. And certainly I think, at least in that setting, seemed more likable than what our public perception is of Kamala Harris so far. But the more I've read about this guy, I mean, his relationship with China, and I'm not saying he's been taking money from China like the Biden family has, but I mean, he's got an infatuation with communist China, and that's quite alarming because you're right. His policies are as liberal as Kamala Harris, and from what I'm reading, may even be more dramatically left.
So here in Minnesota, we dealt with a lot relating to the extreme authoritarian lockdowns that Walz put forward during the pandemic and his constant changing of the goalposts relating to when we would get our freedoms back here in the state. I only bring that up because I was completely unaware of his background relating to China. Again, in the time that we've been here, it's just something that hasn't come up. The stolen valor issue certainly had, but now we have even more information regarding that. There's information of an individual that traveled to China on one of his 30-some-odd trips who says that Walz is Maoist to the core. We know that he's talked to former students, and really painting a glowing picture of communism to those students in the quotes that have been documented in local papers in Nebraska. And now it all begins to make a lot of sense of how he's governed the state, the comments that he's made over the years. And real quick, what's so bizarre about all of this is that he has a very extensive qualified background. All of these different things, these controversies, these embellishments and lies that he's put forward have been completely unnecessary. He has 24 years in the National Guard. His wife did go through fertility treatments. It wasn't IVF, it was IUI, and yet he lied about that too. I say all of that because it's like Walz's own background and his credentials, like they're not enough for him, that he feels the need to have to go and embellish those. And that's what's so confusing. It's like he doesn't trust his own record to be enough. And I don't trust him. I don't think the people can trust him for that very reason alone.
Yeah, as we talk about the stolen valor accusations, I mean, I've got to respect. I've never served in the military. I didn't have that honor, but I respect anyone who does. He spent 24 years in the military. Good for him. Thank you for your service. You don't have to lie about one ranking above what you actually were to get my approval for that. You were a teacher. Fantastic. The world needs more teachers. Good for you for doing that. You volunteered as a football coach. Fantastic. That's all related. Don't lie about it. Don't embellish it. You don't have to juice up your resume. What you did was enough. It's your policies that I find more alarming.
Yeah. And now we're beginning to realize why he had those policies.
Yeah.
I'm convinced now more than I have ever been. I mean, I always knew that he was a liberal. I never really would have classified him as a radical, even though some of his policies, definitely during the COVID lockdowns, certainly spoke to that. But now that we know more of the background, now I'm beginning to see more of the true Walz and why he's such a danger. It really was this past week that it finally sunk in that we know that the people running the show in the White House, we know how far left they are. But what we're dealing with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz is, again, it's as if we're putting members of the squad this close to the White House. And I'll tell you, the RFK Jr. endorsement of Trump, I was already kind of confident. You don't know what's going to happen over the course of the next few months. But that move alone puts me a little bit more at ease as we head into September early voting and November, because it's a scary thought to think of those two individuals, Harris and Walz, being as close as they are to the White House, because they should be nowhere near there.
One of the items I talked about last week, and you may have made this point as well. We're talking to Jon Justice here on the Scott Sand Show, Twin Cities News Talk on iHeartRadio, and at Jon Justice on Twitter, is that I'm a numbers guy. I mean, you know what I do in addition to the stupid radio show behind the scenes and the management of our iHeartRadio station. So I look at a lot of research and a lot of numbers, and I enjoy looking at the stats and research and polling. So as I'm looking at the decision to have Tim Walz as a running mate makes absolutely no electoral math. He doesn't have any name recognition that adds any legitimacy to a Kamala Harris ticket. But what he does have is that far left policy agenda. So no matter what moderate policies Kamala Harris's people are trying to put out there, because she's not obviously talking to the media or sharing any actual policy beliefs, solidifies my belief that whatever she's saying, she's gonna make a hard turn to the left if elected, and that Tim Walz is the guy to help make things like the Green New Deal and more giveaways, whether it be the $25,000 down payment for a home, for a new home, or student loan forgiveness. Whatever the plan is, he's going to embrace every bit of spending taxpayer money that he can, and that's where he comes into play, and it solidifies her liberal base.
Well, he's had an eye on California with his policy proposals. I mean, I've made this comment recently that Walz is really he's Newsom with less hair and wearing flannel. I mean, that's who he aspires to be. And it's funny, Scott, because just by the nature of us being talk show hosts, we analyze this stuff and break it down every single day. But when you really get down to it, it comes down to relationships. I mean, you know that and I know that. Sure, you have teams and Kamala has a team, but it really comes down to these interpersonal relationships and how people respond to one another, in all kinds of different circumstances, whether it's politics or whether it's, what we do in radio. And when Kamala first picked and when she first chose Walz, and the question was, why did she choose Walz? One of the initial reports we got was that he got along with the team and Kamala really connected with him. Well, now I think we know why. It's exactly what you said. It's all of this background of Walz's affinity with China, what he said before in the past, what people around him have said. When you look at Kamala Harris and what she proposed when she was running before she dropped out from running for the presidency in 2019 and 2020, we have all those clips. We know how far. She called herself a radical, for crying out loud. And I think with Kamala's father, as we know too, being a Marxist professor, her being raised in a family like that, I think really it came down to these two are just two peas in sort of a Marxist pod, and they have this common ground together. I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think it's a big reason why she picked him.
I think the RFK endorsement will help somewhat, hopefully in states of electoral significance like Pennsylvania. But it's quite obvious that the media is not going to share her background, her beliefs, her policies. And I do fear the enthusiasm that the Democrats may have right now from young voters, from African-American voters with Kamala Harris, with suburban women over reproductive rights. Whatever item you want to say, whatever historical significance you want to take, there's obviously more energy for Kamala Harris today than there is Donald Trump. But that could change, and Donald Trump always outperforms the polling. So we've got that to hang on to as well.
Well, what I think is really interesting, and I agree with that, there seems to be a change in the media with this, too, that I think could really switch up this. Sorry about that. My phone went on speaker. My apologies.
Yeah.
I think there's a dynamic within the media where we saw the media come straight out and really call out those policies that she put forward last week, leaning into how, these are things that have been tried in communist countries and they failed. And I was really surprised by that. But with the economy being what it is, and these companies, these corporations, these media outlets, they need advertisers and they need money too.
Right.
And I don't expect them to start being fair, Scott, by any stretch. But I do think that you're going to see a bit better reporting in what they're proposing because, their dollars are on the line in this as well. And I think that could be a bit of a change even among the enthusiasm that people have for Harris over what they did for Biden.
And if you're a business owner, iHeartMedia is a fantastic place to advertise. Hey, John, great to have you on. Have a great weekend. Follow at Jon Justice on Twitter, and you can find him in the morning on Twin Cities News Talk in Minneapolis on our free iHeartRadio app.